Welcome to episode 1 of Vanished, a Crime Curve series exploring the stories of those who disappeared and the shadows they left behind. Today, we begin with Susan Powell, a devoted mother, a woman whose life was unraveling behind closed doors. This is her story.
Maybe there's a reason I haven't found her yet. Maybe having her story brought up again and again and again in the news helps somebody else who could end up like her get out in time before it's too late.
Susan Cox Powell was the kind of woman who made a lasting impression. She had a big, bright smile that made people feel like they'd known her forever. She laughed easily. She listened when you spoke. She cared deeply about others. She loved to garden. She was an avid scrapbooker. And she absolutely adored being a mom. To Susan, motherhood wasn't a role, it was a calling.
The newest member I'm sorry.
No, we're not idiots. We don't butcher the Spanish language.
You don't. This is the newest member of Susan and Josh's family.
This is our baby.
She filled her home with warmth, tradition, and little touches that made everyday moments feel special. She believed in love. She believed in faith. And she believed in building a good life, even when it wasn't easy. Born in Oregon in 1981, Susan grew up in a close-knit family. Her parents, Chuck and Judy, were devout members of the LDS Church, and Susan embraced that faith as part of her identity. It shaped her values, her choices, and her view of what a happy, healthy family should look like. In her early 20s, she met a young man named Joshua Powell at a church function. He was polite, attentive, charming in a reserved sort of way. And Susan, ever the optimist, saw potential. She believed love could be nurtured, built, strengthened over time. They married in 2001, and in the beginning, things seemed promising.
Hold your hand up, please. Susan. Great. Now we will no longer look at your fingers. We will look at you. Now.
They moved to Washington, then Utah. They welcomed 2 beautiful boys, Charlie in 2005 and Braden in 2007. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect little family. Photos from that time show Susan beaming, holding her boys' clothes, taking them to parks, dressing them in matching outfits for church. She was the kind of mom who never missed a bedtime story, who packed lunch with handwritten notes, who saved every drawing and hung it proudly on the fridge. But while Susan poured love into her children, the cracks in her marriage to Josh were beginning to widen. Josh didn't like that Susan worked outside the home, but he couldn't hold the job himself. He didn't like when she spent time with friends, but often withdrew from her emotionally. He was obsessed with control over money, decisions, and her time. He limited her access to family. He micromanaged what groceries she bought, and over time, he started to isolate her. Still, Susan tried. She hoped. She believed people could change. She often said, "You don't walk away from marriage because it's hard. You work through it." So she worked. She clipped coupons, took the bus to work, went back to school. She even made a point to attend marriage counseling, hoping Josh would join her. But Josh wasn't interested in healing. He was interested in power, and it was wearing Susan down. In private, she confided in friends about her growing fears. She started keeping a record of arguments. She quietly documented their finances. And in one heartbreaking move, she wrote a last will and testament, not because she was sick, but because she was scared. "If I die," she wrote, "it may not be an accident." That one sentence revealed everything. Susan wasn't just unhappy, she was in danger. But even then she stayed for Charlie, for Braden, for the possibility, however slim, that Josh might one day see how much damage he was doing. She loved those boys more than anything in the world, and she was willing to endure discomfort, even fear, if it meant they could grow up with both parents in the home.
July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33, Mountain Time.
She kept the peace. She played the role. She smiled for the neighbors. But inside, Susan was drowning. It was a cold Monday morning, December 7th, 2009, when everything changed. Susan didn't show up to work. Her sons weren't dropped off at daycare. Calls went unanswered. Messages weren't returned. For a woman as dependable as Susan, this was loud, deafening. By early afternoon, Her family, friends, and coworkers were worried, deeply worried. Some of them had seen Susan just the day before, on Sunday, at church. Others had spent time with her at a neighbor's house that same afternoon, watching her knit while the kids played. She seemed tired, but calm. There were no signs she was planning to leave, no mention of a trip, no indication of distress. When police arrived at the Powell home on Sarah Circle, the door was locked, but there was no sign of forced entry. The house was quiet, too quiet. They entered through a window. Inside, everything looked fine, on the surface. But there were strange details, things that didn't add up. 2 box fans were set up in the living room, pointed downward at a patch of wet carpet. The scent of cleaning solution still hummed faintly in the air. Susan's purse sat untouched on a shelf, still holding her wallet, keys, and ID. Her cell phone was nowhere to be found. Her car was parked in the driveway. There were no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Susan had been erased, carefully, quietly, and completely. Hours passed, and then sometime after 5:00 p.m., Josh Powell finally returned home with his 2 sons in tow. When detectives asked where he'd been, his answer made jaws drop. "Camping," he said. "We went camping last night, the boys and I." Camping. In the middle of the night, on a Sunday, in the middle of a snowstorm. When pushed for details, Josh said he'd taken the boys to Simpson Springs, a remote, snow-covered area in Utah's West Desert. It was pitch black, icy, subzero. He claimed they roasted marshmallows, that the kids had fun, that he didn't think it was odd to take a spontaneous winter camping trip hours before a work week started. Police weren't buying it. No one was, especially not when they found Susan's cell phone in the family minivan. And especially not when they learned that Josh hadn't answered a single call or message all day, not even from Susan's worried employer. Instead, he had spent the day driving aimlessly, visiting friends, renting a carpet cleaner, and avoiding every question thrown his way. Detectives quickly separated Josh from the children and questioned both boys. And then, chillingly, 5-year-old Charlie said something that stopped everyone in their tracks. "Mommy went with us, but she didn't come back."
Will you sit right there?
So I wrote the search warrant for that.
Charlie, has anybody talked to you about your mom? No?
I not know where she is. She got lost somewhere.
During that interview, it's very clear that Charlie has been coached. His answers are extremely evasive.
We can't talk about Susan or camping. I always keep things as secrets.
The only thing we got out of that time was that at one point he said that she went camping, but she didn't come home with them. And then he kind of clammed up after that.
I didn't want to talk to you on this long. I mean it on this many minutes. Now I'm done.
It was a child's voice, innocent but loaded. When asked what he meant, Charlie clammed up, changed the subject, as if he'd been told not to speak. Braden, only 2 at the time, was too young to articulate much, but what little he did say painted a murky, deeply troubling picture. Still, without physical evidence, police couldn't arrest Josh, not yet. So they dug deeper. Investigators later discovered traces of Susan's blood on the living room floor and a handwritten letter from Susan, stashed inside the family safe. The letter detailed fears for her safety. "Josh has been extremely controlling," she wrote. "If anything happens to me, please speak for me. Please help my boys." It wasn't a goodbye letter. It was a warning. But Josh wasn't rattled. He was smug, aloof. He refused a polygraph. He refused to let police search his computer. He refused to answer further questions without an attorney present. And as the investigation ramped up, Josh did something that stunned even the most seasoned detectives.
So if they said that she was with us, then I guess that would put her out in the Pony Express.
He packed up his sons and moved them to Washington State. hundreds of miles away. He claimed it was temporary, but it felt like running. From that point forward, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He gave bizarre media interviews, often speaking of Susan in the past tense. He posted strange YouTube videos that seemed more like rants than statements of innocence. And then, his father Stephen entered the picture. If Josh was the center of the investigation, Susan Powell, Susan's father-in-law, was the wild card no one saw coming. Susan Powell inserted himself into everything. He conducted his own media interviews, claiming, bizarrely, that Susan had flirted with him.
It was definitely a romantic obsession, yeah. I mean, Susan's a beautiful woman, and when a beautiful woman comes onto you like that, it's really hard to resist that kind of a thing. I mean, maybe it's just me. Probably inappropriate, but I admit those things were going on.
That she had come onto him. He said Josh was being treated unfairly. He said Susan was likely still alive out there somewhere, possibly with another man. When police obtained a search warrant for Stephen's home, what they found was something else entirely. Hundreds of photos and videos. Footage of Susan, taken without her knowledge. Shots of her feet, her legs, her bending down. He had taken her used feminine hygiene products from the trash. Kept locks of her hair. Stolen her underwear. Susan Powell wasn't a grieving father-in-law. He was a predator. He was charged with multiple counts of voyeurism and child pornography. The Powell family tree was rotting from the roots. And Susan? Still missing. No trace. No body. No clear cause. Just a trail of red flags. And two little boys caught in the middle. We know Susan's husband Josh was acting erratic and strange, but then her father-in-law stepped into the picture in the most creepy way. 2 years after Susan disappeared, her sons were no longer living with Josh Powell. Investigators had uncovered too much. The blood in the house, the suspicious camping trip, the eerie comments from Charlie, the discovery of Susan's journals, and the disturbing behavior of Josh's father. So, in 2011, the court awarded custody of the boys to Susan's parents, Chuck and Juby Cox. Josh was allowed only supervised visitation twice a week. 1 hour, no exceptions. A social worker had to be present for every second. And yet, on February 5th, 2012, something slipped through. The visit began like the others. Charlie and Braden, now 7 and 5, were dropped off at Josh's rental home in Graham, Washington. The supervising social worker, Elizabeth Griffin Hall, walked the boys to the front door. They ran ahead, smiling, excited to see their dad. Josh opened the door. He smiled too. And then, in one swift motion, he pulled the boys inside and slammed the door shut in her face. He locked it. Griffin Hall pounded on the door. She shouted, she begged. No answer. And then she smelled gas. Her voice trembled as she called 911. I'm the supervisor for a visitation. The father just took the kids into the house and locked me out. I smell gasoline. I need help, right away. She waited in horror as minutes crawled by. She told the dispatcher something was terribly wrong. But the dispatcher pressed her for details, failing to recognize the urgency. He's not supposed to be alone with them. Please, they're in danger. And then, the house exploded. The blast shook the neighborhood. Flames consumed the home in seconds. First responders arrived to a raging inferno, but it was already too late. Inside the rubble, they found the bodies of Josh Powell and his 2 sons, Charlie and Braden. It wasn't just an explosion. Josh had attacked his sons with a hatchet, inflicting injuries to both boys before soaking the home in gasoline and igniting it. He had sent final emails just before, to his attorney, to family, to friends. One simply read, I'm sorry, goodbye. Another, cold and calculated, explained where to find his will. He had planned everything. The gas, the fire, the timing. He had murdered his children to prevent them from being taken from him permanently, to silence them, to destroy what remained of Susan. He made sure nothing was left. And yet, something remained. In the weeks before his death, Charlie had said something else. Mommy was in the trunk, and we went camping. but she didn't come back. No 5-year-old invents that. Josh had told his son just enough to traumatize him, but not enough to get caught. Now, both boys were gone, and with them, the only witnesses to what truly happened the night Susan disappeared. The Powell family home was reduced to ash. But for Susan's parents, the fire hadn't just taken their grandchildren. It had burned away the last thread of hope. What Josh did wasn't just evil. It was final. In the days after the explosion, more secrets spilled out. Police revealed that Josh had been under active investigation at the time of his death. They had been preparing to subpoena him. There were rumors he was on the brink of being arrested. Josh knew the walls were closing in. He didn't wait for the system to catch him. He ended it on his terms. And in doing so, he killed every remaining piece of Susan's world, her children, her legacy, her justice. But even in the aftermath, one mystery remained. Where is Susan Powell? Her body was never found. Police searched deserts, mines, remote wilderness areas. Cadaver dogs hit on multiple spots, but nothing was confirmed. Josh had taken the truth with him. Some believe she was buried in a mine shaft in Utah's West Desert. Others think she may have been dismembered or destroyed in a way that left no remains. There's no grave, no closure, just silence. In 2013, Josh's brother Michael, who had helped him during the early investigation, committed suicide by jumping from a parking garage. He was 30 years old. Investigators believed he knew more than he ever admitted. In 2017, Josh's father, Susan Powell, was released from prison. He died of a heart attack just 1 year later. Everyone directly involved in covering up Susan's disappearance is dead. But Susan's story didn't die. Her parents, Chuck and Judy, turned grief into action. They created the Susan Cox Powell Foundation, advocating for domestic abuse survivors and children caught in dangerous custody battles. They pushed for legislative reform and succeeded. Washington passed the Charlie and Braden Act, which empowers courts to deny visitation rights to parents suspected of abuse, even if they haven't yet been convicted of a crime. The foundation still works today to protect families from slipping through the cracks like Susan did. Because Susan didn't just vanish. She wasn't just a missing person. She was a woman who cried out, who wrote down her fears, who asked again and again for help. And no one heard her until it was too late. Susan Powell wasn't weak. She was fighting every day, quietly, for herself, for her kids, for a future where they could grow up safe and loved. And in the end, she lost everything. But her story, her voice, is still being heard. You're hearing it now. And that means she's not forgotten. Years have passed since the fire, since the boys' laughter was silenced, since Susan's voice was stolen. But her story still echoes in courtrooms, in foundations, in the lives of families she'll never meet. For those who knew her, the memories don't fade. Susan singing softly to her boys as they fell asleep. Susan laughing at bad jokes in the break room. Susan writing in her journal, trying to make sense of a life that looked so perfect from the outside and felt so suffocating on the inside. She wasn't a headline. She wasn't a statistic. She was a woman trying to survive in a cage that looked like a marriage. And the system, time and time again, failed to protect her. It didn't listen when she documented her fear. It didn't act when Josh pulled away from investigators. It didn't intervene when 2 children, 2 innocent boys, were left in the hands of a man unraveling in real time. By the time the sirens arrived, it was already over. And yet, Susan's story is not a tragedy, not completely, because from her silence came action. From her loss came change. Her parents, Chuck and Judy, refused to let their daughter vanish into memory. They showed up at every court hearing, spoke at every press conference. They made sure her name was spoken, not as a victim, but as a warning, because Susan was not the only one. There are thousands of others, men and women, trapped in relationships that erode their sense of self, day after day. What happened to Susan could happen to anyone, and that's why her story matters. But even with all the coverage, even with all the documentaries, the podcasts, the laws passed in her name, there's still one thing we don't have: the truth. Where is Susan Powell? Is she buried deep in the Utah desert, as many believe? Was her body burned, hidden, destroyed? Did Josh have help? Did someone else know more than they ever admitted? We may never get the full story, not in this life, but we can remember her. We can tell her story with care, with clarity, and with weight. And we can shine a light on the darkness others still live in. Because vanishing doesn't just mean gone, it means silenced. And Susan Powell deserves more than silence. If you stayed with us through this story, thank you. We started this series to make sure the missing don't stay missing in our minds. Susan was the first, but she won't be the last. Because next time, we'll share the haunting case of Relisha Rudd, an 8-year-old girl who vanished from a Washington, D.C. homeless shelter. A child lost in plain sight. What happened to Relisha? Who failed her? And why, years later, is there still no trace? That's next on Vanished. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told with respect, clarity, and truth, subscribe, share, and stay with us. Because the stories that matter most are the ones no one wants to talk about. Until now.